Hi everyone, my name is Nick from Coffee Before Arch, and in this episode of C++ Crash Course, we're going to be going over some basic handling of exceptions. So first of all, what is an exception? So an exception gets raised every time we do something illegal in C++. It's going to kill the program. So one example is if we access an array that's an element of an array that doesn't exist, or something that's out of bounds. If we divide something by 0, we get another exception. These are all things that will end up killing the program, and they're generally, they're the things we try to avoid when we're programming. But, in many cases, we're relying on, say, input files, or we're relying on user input. And these are things that, while we hope that a file that we're reading was laid out perfectly as it was intended to be, or a user input was exactly as we wanted it to be, there can be cases where, this just isn't the case. So, but, all isn't lost. We don't have to worry about our programs just randomly crashing. Well, we don't have to worry as much, though, because we can actually test for these types of errors, and if they happen, we can actually recover from them. So we'll go ahead and go to our example for today, which will be basicexceptions.cpp. And so we'll be including another thing from the standard library, the standard except. And we'll use that to get some except types that we'll end up returning, and also have, to get the exception types we'll return. So let's take a simple example. So we'll have this main function here, right? So what we'll do is we'll have an integer. We'll have a double pointer, so this will be a pointer to a pointer, and then we'll try to allocate something of size A, and then we'll just print out something down here. So let's get into the real meat of what's going on here. So when we're handling exceptions, what we do is we use these try catch blocks. So when we say try, that says everything that's in the curly brackets is something that we're going to try executing, and then if it throws an exception, I want you to catch the exception. So here, what we're trying to look for is a bad alloc, which is a type that gets returned by new in case there's a problem with memory allocation on the heap. So we're looking specifically for bad alloc. That's something from the C standard library, and it'll return this error. Okay, so yeah, that's basically how it works. But it's important to know that with these catch blocks, it specifically looks for this type. So if we don't have the right type here, it's not going to fall into this code right here. So right now we're going to try to allocate something using our function, and if something happens in that function, it will go ahead and tell us fail to allocate memory using new. But the thing is, it's not going to kill the program. So we'll still print out down here, this still executes code following an exception. Okay, so let's look at another example. So up here, we have another function that's going to do a division, right? So it will allocate something here, and will allocate something based upon this division of 5 and what we pass in as x. So this divide function right here, this is where we get to this divide by 0 error. So right here, we can tell ahead of time if something's going to divide by 0. And that's just with a simple check of, y is equal to 0. So if y is equal to 0, we can go ahead and throw an exception. So this will automatically return from divide. It will not return any value. It will instead return this exception that, in this time, we're catching it over here. So we have another try catch block that we're trying to catch a runtime error, which we have right here. Again, runtime error is something from the standard library. So in reality, it looks like this. So standard runtime error, but we're using namespace standard, so we're not having to do that scope resolution. So this time we're going to throw a runtime error, and we can actually throw it with a string, right? So here, we'll throw it with a string, and what that does is inside of this error object that gets returned back in the case that we threw this runtime error exception, if we call this what method for this error object, it will actually return back this string, or it'll get this string for us. So here it'll say cut division error, and it'll say you tried to divide by 0. So that's a way we can pass more information back to the user for explicitly what went wrong, not just say segmentation fault if we access some illegal memory or memory that's not mapped to us. Okay, so yeah, that's going to go ahead and do it. Let's see what else we have to say. So we'll look at 2 examples. The first one will be where we fail on memory allocation. So here we'll pass -1. So remember, this division doesn't check to see if it's a negative number you passed in. It just makes sure that it's not y equals 0. So this divide right here will do divide 5 and -1. And so it'll return -5 right here. So 5 divided by -1 is -5. And it will try to allocate an array of size, an int pointer array of size -5. Well, we can't have a negatively sized thing, so it will throw an exception. And so that'll get caught down here. So divide won't fail. Here itself, we're trying to catch something here, but we're only looking for a runtime error, which is what gets returned if there's a failure right here, if we throw it, if we check equal to 0. Now it's important to also note that if we don't catch one of these from, say, divide, it will go all the way back to the main function. So if we, say, didn't have this try catch block to catch this division error right here, or catch a runtime error, it'll go all the way back to main, and we'd have to try and catch that inside of the main function. But we're catching it inside of allocate. But for the first one, we won't get a division error. We'll get a memory allocation error. So let's go ahead and compile this. So it'll be basic exceptions, .cpp, no errors. So let's run basic exceptions. So we did something clearly illegal. We tried to allocate negative memory. So in this case, instead of just crashing, it says failed to allocate memory using new. And that's something that we printed out. The other important thing to know is we're printing out this C error. So there's really there's not just standard out like we normally print when we do C out. There's also C error and also C in. So in this case, when we have an error, we print to standard error instead. So that's going to do it for that example. Now in the other example, we'll go ahead and see what happens when you pass in a 0. So this instead it won't fail here. It'll fail before the memory allocation. It'll fail right here at the divide. So the divide will throw a runtime error, which will go back to main, it will go back to allocate, and then allocate will catch this, and then it will end up returning, right, without actually doing any allocation because divide failed. So let's go ahead and compile this again and run it. So here is this caught division error. You tried to divide by 0. And then again, we still execute code following an exception. We could purposely end the program if we wanted to. We could exit, or we could say continue on. So when would be situations where we would want to first catch exceptions or catch things like this and know that something went wrong? Well, we wouldn't want to, say, run a function for 7 hours or something if we knew ahead of time that it was going to break. So we could go ahead and throw an exception then, and we could either exit the program or maybe tell the user, hey, what you gave us was incorrect. I need something of a different format. So that's going to go ahead and do it for today. That's a very basic introduction to exceptions. So these are very powerful things as far as writing, maintainable code that, you can, instead of just trying to debug something that, just gives you a generic segmentation fault. If you know things are going to be problem areas, you can go ahead and put them in try catch blocks and see exactly where you're failing. So it can be pretty useful in that regard. So as always, if we go to github.com/coffeebeforearch, we've got all the other series that I work on. We're looking at C++ crash course. Over here we have all the videos, the concepts, and the files associated with those videos. And if we go to fundamental concepts and miscellaneous topics, we've got basicexceptions.cpp. So feel free to play around with this, ask questions, and let me know if there's anything that you need help with, and I'd be happy to make a video explaining it. So, as always, I'm Nick from Coffee Before Arch, and I hope you have a nice day.